The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 129. Corridor Convocations and Confrontations. Draco turned away from the Great Hall, where Kingsley Shacklebolt was planning the battle. Even though Shacklebolt knew who he was, and what he was not here to be part of the main fight plan. That hadn't been how he'd operated this entire time, and he wasn't about to start. He hurried up the stairs, drawing up his hood as he did so to cover his giveaway hair. There was rumbling outside of the castle, an ominous sound that struck fear and paranoia within him. Throughout the floors above him, he could hear hurried footsteps, the cries of younger students as they rushed to leave. As he rounded the staircase into the 4th floor and hurried through the corridor, a hand snaked out from the shadows and grabbed at him. Startled, he tripped a bit, nearly falling into the wall. The hand groped out into the semi-darkness and grabbed the shoulder of his robes, yanking hard to pull him into the classroom, from which the arm extended. Draco was a bit curious and allowed it. The arm was small, and though it didn't quite look like Hermione's arm, she might be transfigured or under polyjuice. The door closed, and a wand was lit between himself and his aggressor. It was not Hermione. It was Pansy Parkinson. The maniacal look on her face unsettled Draco even more. "Where have you been?" she asked urgently. "Sorry." "You didn't come back after Easter? I heard that you were hunting Potter and Weasley in the mudblood. What happened? How are they still running free around here?" Pansy asked with a glint in her eyes. Draco was silent, building his occlumency walls around him. Who had she heard this from? His mother had told this to Bellatrix, Voldemort, and the other Death Eaters who had asked, but to no one else. "I've been busy, Pansy. How do you know that's what I was doing?" he asked cautiously. "A little birdie told me." Pansy laughed an odd, tinkly laugh. "That's what she told me to call her if you ever asked if we knew each other. Isn't that funny?" Draco's blood ran cold. No, it wasn't funny at all. "You're in contact with Bellatrix?" "Of course, silly. She's been recruiting me for years now. I met her at Uncle Corbin's house the summer after 5th year. She has so much passion, so much dedication for the cause. She's frankly inspiring." "And you've been feeding her information about me?" Draco asked, a bit sadly. Pansy had been his friend for so many years. It was hard to believe the betrayal. "I have not been feeding anyone information. You make things sound so sinister. She asks how you are and what you're up to, and I tell her. It's no different than anyone else. She's my friend, my mentor. It's not like anyone is keeping secrets from anyone else." Draco occluded harder than ever. If Pansy really was the protégé she claimed to be, it was possible that Aunt Bellatrix had been teaching her a lot more than the doctrine of insanity she normally showered upon everyone else around her. Pansy's eyes turned flitty. "But it does feel like you're hiding something, Draco. What is it?" Draco sneered at her, the girl he once thought he knew. "The only thing I've hidden from you, Pansy dear, is my extreme dislike of you. But don't worry about it. I won't hide it any more. You disgust me. You've disgusted me for some years now, and now I can let you know to your face," he said bitingly. "And feel free to pass on the same sentiment to my dear Aunt Bella if you see her." Pansy looked as though she'd been slapped, but the look disappeared after only a moment. She sneered back at Draco. "So, that's who you've turned into, then? A blood traitor? No better than a Weasley? You will turn your back on everything we've built, everything we have worked towards." "Who is the we you're speaking of?" Draco asked. Pansy pushed up the sleeve of her summer-weight jumper, exposing her dark mark. Draco stared at it for a full 10 seconds or so, then asked simply, "When?"
"Christmas holidays. Our 6th year. I turned 17 that November. My parents could no longer stop me."
That maniacal look was back in Pansy's eyes.
"You always did get what you wanted, didn't you, Pansy?"
Draco said flatly.
"Yes, Draco, I did."
She crossed her arms in front of her, a wide grin stretching her face.
"And you always a fucking bitch for it."
He spat the words at her.
"If this is about 4th year, Draco, you know you liked it."
Pansy leered slightly at him, showing the briefest hint of a gleam of alecto on her face.
"I did not want that," he said hotly. "Not then, and never from you. You might not rot in a prison cell for that, but I will do every fucking thing I can to make sure you rot in one for this."
Draco seethed, jabbing a finger in the direction of her dark mark, careful not to touch it.
"If I will be there, you will be there too, Draco,"
Pansy said smoothly, grabbing at his own arm. He yanked away from her.
"You don't get to put your filthy hands on me ever again. I didn't want this mark on me."
He gestured in disgust at his arm.
"Just like I didn't want your mouth on me all those years ago. But I'm done letting other people make decisions for me."
With that, Draco spun on his heel and left the classroom quickly. The girl he'd known when they were children, the girl who used to pick wildflowers by the lake and ask him and Theo to dance or to judge her fashion shows, who reminded him of his mother, was gone. He did not recognize the girl in her place. Back out in the corridor, he had to flatten himself against the wall as Neville, Professor Sprout, Madam Hooch, and several Hufflepuffs ran by, holding potted plants and wearing earmuffs.
"Budge up there, Malfoy, there's a good lad,"
Sprout called as they thundered past. Neville tipped him a wide-eyed smile and nodded at him as he ran. They disappeared around the staircase that he was heading towards, but just as he started to move, a coin warmed in his pocket. He took it out to read as he walked. It was Theo.
"5 of us gathered to fight. Us plus Violetta, Urquhart, and the Creevy bloke from Gryffindor. Found him wandering a dungeon corridor."
Draco wrote back, "Stay safe. Going to find H in the room of requirement. Just saw Pansy. Did you know she had the mark?" It was a full minute or so before he replied.
"I didn't know. Colin and Urquhart both saw it because they've both seen her naked, but neither one knew what it was. This shit just got awkward real quick."
In spite of the seriousness of the whole situation, Draco could not help but let out a small laugh. The laugh died on his lips as soon as he started up the staircase. Above him there was a large crash, and several of the subjects in the paintings that lined the staircase raced up ahead of him to see what was the matter. There was loud barking, and Draco heard Hagrid trying to reassure his dog as they raced away, further into the castle. He passed several knots of students, each guarding an entrance or a window. He nodded hello to some, avoided the gaze of others. He felt the hardened look of Aberforth, Dumbledore's brother, upon him. He stared at his feet as he passed the older man, feeling the shame for his part in Dumbledore's death. Draco reached the next landing to find the minuscule shards of a recently broken, massive vase. He pressed onwards, hurrying towards the room of requirement, where he knew Hermione to be. Just as he reached the landing of the 7th floor, the floor with the room of requirement on it, he spotted Pansy, Selwyn, and Avery ahead. She must have known about a shortcut that he did not. He sucked in a breath and backpedaled into a nearby alcove. He took a few deep breaths and disillusioned himself before slipping out of the alcove once more. He managed to move along the edge of the wall away from them, further down the hallway. He rounded the corner, coming face to face with 3 women. An older woman wearing the ugliest hat that Draco had ever seen, and carrying a very large red handbag, stalked past him, muttering about her grandson. But Draco was focused on the other two women. Ginny and Tonks were just ahead, each looking around as though assessing the situation, which seemed to be growing more dire by the minute. There was faint dust in the air, and the explosions seemed to be coming closer together now. He stepped close to his cousin and said, "Watch her, Tonks."
"Draco?"
Tonks said, a bit of relief on her face. Ginny looked around, staring at a space 3 feet to the side of him.
"Oi, ferret, you made it. Better late than never, I suppose," she said,
though she smiled as she said it. "Yeah, turns out a hop, skip, and jump through the Hogsmeade Mountains and the Forbidden Forest aren't quite as easy as they sound," Draco joked quietly. Then he turned serious. "But, Tonks, you shouldn't be here. What about Teddy?"
"Mum has him. He'll be fine until we get back. Remus needs me right now."
Privately, Draco wished that his cousin could fight the instinct to fight better, but he didn't have the ability to order her to go home. Instead, he asked, "Have either of you seen Hermione?"
"She and Harry and my brother just went in there,"
Ginny said, jerking a thumb at the trolls dancing tapestry.
"They kicked us out. Not sure what they're doing, but they needed the room to be empty."
They were transforming the room, Draco thought. He knew it had been an evacuation point, as he had overheard a couple of students commenting that they were heading to the 7th floor back when they were exiting the Great Hall. Now, Potter needed it to be something else. Had he figured out where the diadem was? There was a small burst of broken glass near them, and Draco flung his arms up over his head, his automatic response to the sound of glass shards hitting a stone floor. When he looked up again, he was heartily thankful for the disillusionment charm that neither witch had seen his automatic reaction. They were now standing at the nearby window, several panes of which had been broken just moments before, staring down at the grounds below them. There was the sound of grinding stone, and Draco turned to look over just in time to see Potter emerging from the wall behind the troll tapestry. He flattened himself against the wall to avoid dust settling on his invisible figure. Weasley and Potter were talking with Tonks and Ginny about the battle raging all around them, but Draco's eyes were raking over his witch with longing to go to her. Even now, with dust in her hair and a bit of slime on the cuff of her muggle jeans, she was beautiful. She was flushed red and looked a bit ill, green around the gills, as Hagrid would likely say. Perhaps the after-effects of destroying a Horcrux, Draco thought. Tonks tore off down the hallway, yelling over her shoulder, and Draco wanted to call her back. She should be evacuating, leaving the battle, not running further into it. Then Potter was yelling something at her, and Weasley, and the 3 of them began running through the corridor, turning and running back again. Draco recognized the method for opening the room of requirement. They passed one final time. Then the door creaked open, and the 3 of them disappeared inside. As they did so, the Weaselette rushed past him.
"Good luck, ferret,"
she called, racing in the same direction as Tonks. Shit. Draco was fairly certain Potter had asked her to stay put, but, like pretty much every other witch he knew, she had made up her own mind. Draco wondered what he should do now. The 3 of them were in the room, and he wasn't sure what they were doing in there. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. "Venite and contortum!" He felt his disillusionment fade away, and found himself visible again, standing in the corridor. Vince and Greg stood 10 feet away, behind a tall, empty plinth. "Hey, Draco! Long time, no see," said Vince's soft voice. "Why were you just talking to those blood traitors?" "Just trying to get information," Draco said evasively. Thankfully, both boys seemed to accept this explanation without question. "Where you been? We haven't seen you since Easter," Vince pointed out. Draco paused. From what he knew, bacon and eggs were in the pocket of Lord Voldemort, so the truth likely wouldn't be well received. "Searching for Potter and Weasley and the Muggleborn. I followed them here." "The mudblood, you mean?" Vince sneered.
Greg cut his eyes sideways at his portly friend. "They just went in there." Vince gestured to the wall behind, which lay the room of requirement. "Yeah, I saw," Draco answered.
"So, get us in there." Greg gestured. "I don't want to stand around here whilst this place gets demolished around us."
Draco hesitated. I don't know where they went." "I just told you. In there. You know how to get in." Vince snarled. "But the room changes, you see. They could be anywhere." Draco did not know how to explain the transfigurative permutations of the room of requirement, largely because he wasn't sure how it worked himself. There was no chance that he'd be able to explain this in terms that Vincent Crabbe would understand. "Do it," Crabbe said, raising his left hand to point his wand at Draco. "I told you to do it. Now do it." His right hand came up to pull up his robe sleeve, exposing his dark mark. Draco sucked in a breath and shot his eyes over to Greg. Greg, like him, was a bit transfixed by the mark on Vince's arm. Draco hoped that meant that perhaps Greg had not taken it as well. "I can try," Draco said. He walked past the tapestry, turned and walked back, repeating the steps 3 times. The entire time he thought, "I need the place where everything is hidden. I need a place to hide Hermione and keep her safe until this is done. I need a place to lose Vince so that he can't follow me. I need the place where everything is hidden." On the 3rd pass, the door miraculously appeared. Draco sucked in a breath. Potter had seemed certain. The diadem. It had been hidden in here. Then Vince and Greg were pushing past him into the doorway, and Draco followed. Vince had become a bit of a loose cannon, a potion nearly boiling over the edge of its cauldron. Draco wasn't allowing him to wander this place where his witch was searching, alone. The room felt much the same as it had when he'd last been inside of it, only about 10 months ago. Tottering piles of junk and debris, blasted-apart desks and shattered broomsticks, feathers and broken quills, cracked statues and a stuffed troll, all of it reaching to the ceiling, which hovered so high as to be out of sight. A noise to his left made him and his cohorts turn, and Vince shot off in that direction, Draco and Greg following quickly. There ahead, Potter was rushing along the aisle, brandishing a wand. Draco's wand, ahead of him. A bit more than 10 feet in front of him stood a burned wardrobe, similar in size but much worse condition than the vanishing cabinet. Potter reached out as though to touch the cabinet eagerly, but Draco suddenly saw it all about to happen, as if it was him that had the power to see the future, and not Trelawney. Potter would get the diadem, and Vince, with his dark mark and his Caro training and his gullibility for the bile spilled by Voldemort, would overpower him and take it. "Hold it, Potter!" Draco called out in a rush. Potter froze and spun to face him.
Chapter 130. Friends, Foes, Fyre. Vince and Greg stood in front of him, but Draco pushed between them to better see the scar-faced wizard. Both boulder-sized wizards had their wands drawn, and Potter pointed Draco's wand at them all. Draco raised his mother's wand defensively. "That's my wand you're holding, Potter," he said, nervousness creeping into his voice. "Not any more," Potter said, his hand gripping the hawthorn wand tightly. "Winners, keepers, Malfoy. Who's lent you theirs?" "My mother," said Draco, aware of how petulant and childish that sounded. Potter laughed humorlessly. Draco's hand sweated on the elm as he tightened his grip. "So, how come you 3 aren't with Voldemort?" asked Potter. Both Draco and Greg flinched a bit. Had Potter learned nothing from his experiences at Malfoy Manor? But the unplottability of Hogwarts held up, and there was no rush of additional Death Eaters, thank Merlin.
"We're gonna be rewarded," said Vince. "We hung back, Potter. We decided not to go. Decided to bring you to him."
Draco's stomach lurched. Vince sounded so childlike, like a youngster promised a lolly for good behavior.
"Good plan,"
Potter said drolly. His eyes shifted sideways to look at the burned-out cupboard, only 10 feet away. "Don't look at it," Draco urged. "Don't draw more attention to it." But now Potter was edging towards the cupboard, and Draco spotted it. An ugly, broken bust, a wig, and atop them both, a tarnished crown with a dark blue, glittering gemstone at its center. Draco's stomach lurched, and he felt a tightening in his balls. It was similar to the feeling that he first had when he learned of the existence of Horcruxes. To see it now, to know the evil that it held, he had to fight his own urge to seize the thing and try to snap it in two. But Potter was speaking again, and Draco shifted his eyes back to the Gryffindor.
"So, how did you get in here?"
Draco scoffed. "I virtually lived in the Room of Hidden Things all last year. I know how to get in."
"We was hiding in the corridor outside," Goyle volunteered. "We can do disillusionment charms now. And then you turned up right in front of us and said you was looking for a diadem. What's a diadem?" "Harry!"
It was Weasley, calling from nearby, still hidden by the detritus of years of Hogwarts students.
"You talking to someone?"
Vince moved with surprising litheness, whipping his wand around to the left in the direction of Weasley's voice. He yelled, "Descendo!" The top of the nearest pile began to topple away from them, towards where Weasley likely stood. Broken items began raining down onto the floor below, from the tops of the piles. "Run!" Potter yelled, and somewhere to Draco's right, Hermione screamed. Draco fought the urge to race towards the sound of her voice, grab her, and get the fuck out of there with her. Potter screamed, "Venite!" At the same time, Draco cried, "No!" He reached out and pulled Vince's arm down as Vince made to do the spell again. Draco thought fast. "If you wreck the room, we might bury this, diadem thing." "What's that matter?" grumbled Vince. "It's Potter the Dark Lord wants. Who cares about a diadem?" "Potter came in here to get it," Draco said slowly, as though explaining something to a 5-year-old. "So that must mean—" "Must mean," said Vince to Draco with heretofore unseen anger and annoyance. "Who cares what you think? I don't take your orders no more, Draco. You and your dad are finished."
"Harry, what's going on?"
shouted Weasley once more. Vince looked over in the direction of Weasley's voice, and Draco watched as Potter made a move for the diadem, which he had been inching closer to the entire time. Vince mimicked Weasley. "Harry, what's going—" But then Vince spotted Potter reaching for the Horcrux. "No, Potter! Crucio!" Draco nudged Vince's arm, and the curse flew past Potter and hit the ugly bust in front of him. The bust flew sideways, and the wig and crown were tossed up into the air. Up, up it sailed, and then tumbled down into a fresh pile of rubbish, 6 feet away. Vince made to repeat the curse. "Stop!" Draco screamed, lunging for Vince's wand arm. "The Dark Lord wants him alive." "So? I'm not killing him, am I?" Vince yelled back, pushing at Draco. "But if I can, I will. The Dark Lord wants him dead, anyway. What's the Draco reached out to yank at the other wizard's arm. Perhaps if he could get Vince on the ground, Potter could fire off an incarcerus and get back to what he was doing before they arrived. But Vince was hefty, and Draco was hardly able to budge him. Instead, it was he who was slipping and sliding on the broken quills and discarded bits of parchment below. He fell on his ass, still scrambling at Vince's arm. Suddenly, from behind them, a red jet of light from a spell shot past them all. Hermione had come from around the corner and had fired a stunning spell straight at Vince, only missing him because Draco had been pulling on his arm. "It's that mudblood! Avada Kedavra!" Vince yelled loudly, and Draco's absolute fury nearly blinded him. He tried to lunge himself bodily up off the ground, kicking at Vince's legs, whilst simultaneously aiming any and every jinx, hex, and curse at him that his instincts could come up with. Hermione, thankfully, had jumped to the ground at the utterance of mudblood, and the curse missed. Potter fired a stunner at Vince. The portly wizard, trying to fight off the attack from Draco's feet, fell towards Draco. Vince knocked Narcissa's wand aside as he came crashing down. The elm wand rolled away under the burned cabinet, lost to the room that had already taken so much from him. In fury, Draco pushed and shoved at Crabbe, then looked up and saw Greg aiming at Potter, now that he was outnumbered 3-2. "Don't kill him! Don't kill him!" Draco yelled at the two Slytherins, both of whom were pointing their wands at Potter. Both wizards, thankfully, hesitated, and Potter did his signature move. "Expelliarmus!" The scarred wizard shouted. Greg's wand flew up and over yet another pile of junk, and he tried to jump over a small pile to retrieve it. Hermione shot another stunner at Vince, who was rolling around with Draco. It just missed, catching Draco in the arm. Weasley careened around a corner and shot a Petrificus Totalis at Vince, who was now on his feet, still trying to get away from Draco, who was attempting to pull him down again. Vince whirled around and shouted, "Avada Kedavra!" again. Weasley jumped into a pile of out-of-fashion robes, narrowly avoiding the green streak of the curse. He took off down a different aisle, with Vince in ungainly pursuit. Thankfully for Weasley, Vince had never eaten as well as he had this year, so whilst his strength was unmatched in this room, his movements and reactions were decidedly slow. Goyle was now firing haphazardly at each of them in turn, Draco included, unsure of who to fight next. Draco jumped behind a nearly broken curio to avoid being hit. As it was, the spell ripped a bit of his sleeve away. Hermione charged towards Draco and Greg, screaming, "No!" as she came. She aimed a stunning spell right at Greg's chest, spinning him around with the force of it. She bent low over Draco, touching his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Draco grasped her hand furtively, looking at Potter's turned back. "Fine, my. Help Potter. The diadem, it fell into that pile he's digging in, but—" "It's somewhere here!" Potter yelled to Hermione as he abandoned the search, pointing at the nearby pile of debris. "Look for it, whilst I go and help—" "Hurry!" Hermione screamed. A roaring, billowing noise behind Potter had all three of them turning in horror to look. Weasley and Vince were running back in an all-out sprint to them from the direction they had run earlier. "Like it hot, scum!" screamed Vince, as he looked back over his shoulder at the ginger-haired wizard in glee. But the flames. They were not the normal licks of heat given off by mundane fire. They seemed to engulf whole sections of space in a matter of seconds. The flames leaped from tower to tower of rubbish, consuming and evaporating everything in its path. "Fuck!" Draco groaned to himself. "We've got to get out of here. It's fiend fire!" He yelled to Hermione and Potter, but his words were drowned out by the fire's roar. She looked at Draco uncertainly, turned towards the door, then looked back at Potter. "Let's go!" he yelled again. He grabbed Goyle under the larger wizard's arm and heaved him as high as he could on his shoulder. He staggered under the larger boy's weight and took small but quick steps in the direction of the door, his vision almost entirely taken up by the unconscious wizard's arm. He just had to hope that Hermione and Potter would listen to him, but Potter hadn't even seemed to hear him. "Run!" Potter finally yelled, and the three Gryffindors took off together in a different direction, clearly thinking there was a shortcut. Vince was now far ahead, all joy at his creation wiped clean from his face. "Draco?" he called back, and Draco locked eyes with him, seeing his fear. "Vince, help me get Greg to the door!" Draco called, but his words were carried away by the whoosh of the flames behind him. Draco chanced a look behind him. The fire had transformed. No longer abstract shapes, the frolicking flames now resembled beast-like creatures, dancing dragons and spiraling snakes that curled and grew greedily, reaching for the ceiling that seemed to stretch infinitely upwards. Hermione and the other Gryffindors were out of sight now. Draco only had to hope that they'd found that shortcut and were making it to the exit. The smoke made his eyes water, and he was sweating profusely from the heat. The flames were licking closer. Goyle was slumped against him, still stunned from Hermione's spell. "Innervate!" Draco shrieked uselessly at the unconscious wizard, to no avail. Without a wand, there was no way that he could carry out such a difficult spell. He looked back to where he'd last seen Vince. There was a line of fire snaking like a serpent between them now. Vince looked at Draco, struggling under the weight of their friend once more, then turned and ran. "Vince! Vince, oh my God, help!" Draco screamed. Behind him, Draco spotted a small tower of broken desks, stacked 4 high. He pushed Goyle onto the lowest one, then clambered up to the second one, pulling the other boy up. He worked his way a bit higher onto the third one, pulling Greg to the second one, still screaming for help as loudly as his searing lungs would allow. Then, as if by some miracle, a gleam of light reflected off of 2 round bits of glass, a broom handle, a hand reaching out from the hazy smoke. It was Potter. Draco stretched up towards him, but with his grip on Goyle, they were much too heavy for Potter's slight frame to lift. Draco pulled Greg up with him onto the 3rd desk, then pushed him up onto the 4th. Then Weasley and Hermione were approaching, and Hermione's confident, blazing copper gaze steadied him in a way that nothing else could have. Weasley was screaming frantically, but Hermione and Draco worked together to get Goyle onto the broom between her and Weasley. She reached for him next, but Draco shook his head. There was no way that 4 of them would fit on one broom. "Go!" Weasley heard him say it and did not wait, despite Hermione's frenzied protestations. The 3 of them zoomed away, leaving Draco staring after them. But only for a moment. Potter came back for a second pass, and without Goyle's unconscious weight, Draco was able to scramble onto the back of the broom easily. "The door! Get to the door! The door!" he screamed at Potter. They were closing in on the others, Hermione looking back fearfully at them, grasping at Weasley's torso, struggling to hold Goyle onto the broom. All around them, the broken and mutilated objects of the room were being tossed up into the air by the sparkling heat. Fanged frisbees with missing teeth, falling apart textbooks, broken bowls, a cursed necklace, a box with messy writing on top, and a crown. A crown. Potter swerved and did a little pirouette in mid-air, shades of their first Quidditch match against each other, when the rogue bludger was chasing him. "What are you doing? What are you doing? The door's that way!" Draco screamed, knowing it was futile to try and talk sense into Potter. He'd spotted the diadem and was determined to go back for it. Potter leaned forward, and Draco held him tight around the torso. "Shit," his mind screamed at him. "We're going to die because of this search, after all." But Potter stretched out an arm, and the tiara was suddenly, miraculously, on his arm in a way that seemed statistically impossible, but was also very Potter-like. Then the other wizard was steering them up and away from the snapping jaws and greedy clutches of the fire below. "I wish for an exit to be in front of us. We need an exit!" Draco called loudly, hoping that the room's magic hadn't depleted yet. "There! Ahead!" Draco thought, urging Potter forward with each and every fibre of his being. The door to the outside world was close enough that they could see the forms of the others, hurtling towards it now. Draco watched as she exited the room, her halo of tumultuous curls transforming from fire-lit to dark, her eyes following their progress behind her the entire way. Draco felt as though he could weep to see her cross the barrier and leave the room, gaining safety. Then he realized He was weeping. Weeping, screaming, all of it. All in an effort to urge them forward. And then, he and Potter were out. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.